Good to see everyone, everyone's face who I see, and all the names. And again, it's wonderful, all the people that we get to stay connected to here in this Tuesday night series. Our speaker tonight is a very special speaker and teacher for several reasons. Dr. Malka Simkovich. She is the Crown Ryan Chair of Jewish Studies and also the Director of the Catholic Jewish Studies program at Catholic Theological Union in Chicago. She is the author of The Making of Jewish Universalism from Exile to Alexandria, and also of Discovering Second Temple Literature, the Scriptures and Stories that Shaped Early Judaism, which received the 2019 AJL Judaica Reference Honor Award. She has published in journals such as the Harvard Theological Review, the Journal of the Study of Judaism, as well as online in a more popular audience, for example, at the Lair House and at Times of Israel. So besides, though, for being such an accomplished, prestigious scholar, which would be more than enough reason to invite her and to look forward to the talk, she and her family, also the Simkoviches, lived here for a number of years, and it's quite obvious she still has many good friends, and so that makes it even more special. I'll just share one brief story. I think the person is on the call, but maybe he stepped off. A few weeks ago, I was walking home with someone who's a newer member of the Israel of Brookline, and he was saying, I hope it's okay, I'm saying the story. I'm reading this really interesting book about the period of the second Beit HaMikdash, and he wanted to know, wanted to share something with me or talking about it. So I said, oh, who's the author? And he said, I can't remember. I'll email you after Shabbos. And then after Shabbos, he emailed me and he said, her name is Malka Simkovich. Have you ever heard of her? So I said, well, she actually used to live here before you moved in. And then when I told him that she would be a speaker Tuesday night, he was very excited about that. I do also want to thank our sponsor for tonight. We would like to thank, let me find it here, the Prentice Family Foundation for sponsoring tonight's talk. Thank you very much. And our topic for tonight, we're just a few days away from Purim, so very appropriately, the topic is Whose Queen Is It Anyway? Hebrew Esther, Greek Esther, and the Judea-Diaspora Relationship and Antiquity. And without further ado, I turn over to Dr. Simkovich.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Hellman, and thank you to other organizers of this event. It is really wonderful to be with all of you and to see virtually very, very good friends on my screen. And I also want to say, since you mentioned my book, that John and Sarah Abbott were the first friends to read, like not even the manuscript, but the pre-draft. And were so polite about all the typos and structural issues and chapters that ended up going in the garbage. So I will always associate their kindness with the earliest drafts of that book, which took 5 years to actually see the light of day. So as I speak, I'm planning on about a 45-minute talk, but feel free to put questions, comments in the chat. I do want to leave about 10 minutes for conversation, for Q&A. I won't be able to read the chat until the end, so maybe it makes sense for you to start putting your questions in towards the end of the hour, but that's one way to do it. Although if we're a small group, then we can also just jump in without using the chat. So we can play that by ear, but definitely hold on to your questions. I'm also going to be sharing a source sheet and happy to email that to anybody who's interested at the end of the hour. So I am going to start by putting my email into the chat box. And there it is. Okay. So many of you are familiar with the fact that a very, very popular version of the Book of Esther circulated in the ancient world in the Greek language, which makes a lot of sense, because by the end of the Second Temple period, the majority of Jews are not living in Judea. You have a sizable population of Jews in Judea. This number is estimated anywhere between 500,000 Jews and 1 million Jews. So there certainly is a substantive population of Jews in Judea, but the majority of Jews by the 1st century CE are living in what's called the Western Diaspora and the Eastern Diaspora, the Western Diaspora being the Mediterranean coastal lands, North Africa, Alexandria, Rome, Italy, Antioch, all these little coastal cities have synagogues and they have Jewish communities. And the Eastern Diaspora, of course, is the community of Jews who had gone to the East in exile and never left this region once Babylonia is now Persia by the late Second Temple period. And so you have Jews scattered throughout the Hellenistic world, and the Jews in, again, what's called, I think a little problematically, called the Western Diaspora. Those Jews are speaking Greek. The Jews in the Eastern Diaspora speaking various dialects of Aramaic. Sorry. And my kids are texting me because they're upstairs. So, you know, they're probably hungry for snacks. So the Jews who are speaking Greek outside of Judea in the Western Diaspora are reading their scriptures in Greek in what's called the Septuagint, which is a collection that is not produced overnight, but produced over 3 or 4 centuries by various authors who are slowly but surely translating the Hebrew Bible, beginning with the Torah, the first 5 books, at the end of the 3rd century BCE. And the reason why I'm going through all this background is only to say that if you know that there is a Greek version of Esther circulating by the 2nd century BCE that Jews who speak Greek in the Western Diaspora are reading, you would assume, I think, that Greek Esther is a diasporan work. And you might also assume that Hebrew Esther is a Judean work, because we tend to associate language with location. And so if Jews in Judea are speaking Hebrew and Aramaic, then they produce Hebrew Esther, maybe. And the Jews in Greek-speaking regions produce Greek Esther. This is actually not the case. And what I want to show tonight is that Greek Esther is a Judean work, and it's a Judean polemic directed towards the diaspora. And I want to suggest that Greek Esther is part of a genre of texts in which Judean Jews are writing texts meant for Greek-speaking Jews in diasporan lands, because they have things to say to these diasporan Jews. And we might find some of these messages resonant. We might think of phrases such as dual loyalty, and maybe some contemporary parallels might pop into our heads as we go along. But we're going to see that Greek Esther is one of numerous texts that are produced in Judea for Greek-speaking Jews in the diaspora to remind those Jews where they come from and to whom they should be loyal. And that if you look at these texts as a genre, you can get a sense not really of the Judea-diaspora relationship, but of what Judeans want the Judea-diaspora relationship to be. And so we're going to start with Greek Esther. And here I'm going to share my screen, which I really don't like to do because I like to see faces, but alas, it is unavoidable in tonight's talk. I have on the source sheet, and like I said, I'm very glad to email anybody who's interested in looking at it after this talk. I have Hebrew Esther, but for our purposes, we're not going to spend a lot of time on Hebrew Esther, except to say that Hebrew Esther is very grounded in the diaspora, in the sense that the existential future of the Jewish people exists in the diaspora. And those people, those individuals who record the story of Esther, who authorize the story, Esther herself, who transmit it, disseminate it, these are all diasporan Jews who make no mention, as we know, of Jerusalem, Judea, the temple, priests in the book of Esther. It is squarely a diasporan story, right? Authorized by diasporans. Now, when you look at Greek Esther, you see a very different story. So Hebrew Esther, if you're familiar with the book, and we read it twice a year, we read it on Purim, but you know, we don't pay attention to the end because the end is a little confusing actually, and we don't love maybe the part where Jews kill 500 people in a war. We don't really celebrate that war part. That's not so much part of the story. Of course, the biggest problem I think with Hebrew Esther is the fact that it ends in intermarriage, something that we also sort of don't talk about so much when we celebrate Purim. But it is important to note that there are these layers of writing and layers of dissemination that all are centered on the diasporan experience. And this is really in contrast to Greek Esther. So Greek Esther, first of all, how do I know that it's Judean? I'm going to get there. It's explicit in the text. But Greek Esther is most unique in that it includes 6 additions that do not appear at all in the Hebrew version. And these 6 additions address obvious theological problems with the Hebrew version. The absence of God, we all talk about that. The absence of references to ancestral law, the absence of prayer. So the additions are actually, they comprise, I don't know if you could see when I highlight it. Can you see that? Okay, good. So they comprise a chiastic structure. The first and the last addition parallel one another. The second and the second to last addition parallel one another, and the middle additions parallel one another. So the first and last addition are actually quite Hellenistic. Mordecai has a dream that reads like a Michael Bay trailer movie. It's extremely dramatic, and I'll get to that in a couple minutes. The last edition is the interpretation of that dream. The second edition and the second to last edition are the texts of the edict of the king. The first edict being, you can kill the Jews. The second to last edition being the edict of repealing that edition, don't kill the Jews or let the Jews fight back. And the middle editions are prayers, very, very, very pietistic prayers of Mordecai and Esther at the moment that, right in the middle of the book, at the moment that she is about to approach the king. I do want to pause and just appreciate this opening edition, because I think it's a great example of how there is no cultural binary between Hellenistic style and what we might call biblical or pietistic Jewish style. This is a very, very pietistic work. It emphasizes, unlike Hebrew Esther, it emphasizes prayer, ancestral law, and God. And yet we have this really Hellenistic scene, this scene of Mordecai. It's almost like a Fiddler on the Roof dream where Tevye wakes up in a sweat. Mordecai in Greek Esther, the story opens with Mordecai having this dream, and just like imagine this playing out on a Hellenistic stage. This was his dream, noises and confusion, thunder and earthquake, tumult on the earth. Then 2 dragons came forward, both ready to fight. I mean, what does this have to do? This is like nothing about this has anything to do with Hebrew Esther. And they roar terribly, and at their roaring, every nation prepares for war to fight against the righteous nation. It was a day of darkness and gloom, tribulation and distress, and so on and so on. Very Hellenistic, almost like the author is laying out instructions about how to perform this as a play on a stage. And what this is functioning to do is to really act as a harbinger of the entire narrative arc. This dream tells us what's going to happen. What is the story? There is going to be a conflict, and one party will be victorious over the other. Now, if you go to the last edition, the Nimshal, the explanation of the parable is very clear. At the very end of the story, Mordecai says, "These things have come from God. I remember the dream that I had concerning these matters, and none of them has failed to be fulfilled." So it's like, I don't know if, I'm not going to sing it, but there's this Miami Boys choir song of like, the little bird is Israel, the vultures are our foes, don't worry about it. So anyway, so we have these additions. Now, if you were to just read these additions, you would maybe think, look, this is a very Hellenistic work. We have these random dragon dreams and all these sort of dramatic, pathos-filled, very Hellenistically stylized descriptions. Even the prayers are Hellenistic, because just the way that Esther and Mordecai are getting on their knees and raising their hands and just crying, and it's extremely Hellenistic, actually, sort of like unavoidably Hellenistic. And yet, if you go to the very, very, very end of Greek Esther, there are 3 mysterious lines that tell you that this document is Judean. And that's known as the Colophon. A Colophon is a scribal edition that appears in many ancient and some medieval texts that give you some information about who the author of this text is and where he lived. And we have a little colophon at the end of the Greek version of Esther that is actually quite mysterious and confusing. The colophon functions to tell us that, in fact, this is not a diasporan text at all. So the colophon reads, "In the 4th year of the reign of Ptolemy and Cleopatra, Dositheus, who said he was a priest and a Levite, and Ptolemy his son, brought into Egypt the foregoing epistole, or epistle, regarding the Frure, I would say the Purim, saying that it was authentic and that Lysimachus, the son of Ptolemy, a resident of Jerusalem, had translated it. So this is very dense. And what's going on over here? First of all, in the 4th year of the reign of Ptolemy and Cleopatra does not help us much because there are a number of queen, king, brother, sister marriages. So there are a number of pairs of Ptolemies and Cleopatras who are married to each other and brother, sister, who are rulers over Hellenistic Egypt. In fact, there are 3. But scholars think that this is the Ptolemy and Cleopatra who lived in the 8th century, not the 8th century, the 8th decade, the 70s BCE. So somewhere in the early 70s BCE, if scholars are correct about which Ptolemy and Cleopatra is, this text was produced and dispatched to Egypt. Dositheus, a Jew living in Judea, not only living in Judea, but living in Jerusalem, not only living in Jerusalem, but a priest and a Levite with, by the way, a Greek name, because these cultural influences are all totally fluid. Dositheus, who said he was a priest and a Levite, and Ptolemy, note the name, his son, brought to Egypt the foregoing letter, meaning the entire text, this whole document concerning Purim, saying that it was authentic. And not only that, but Lysimachus, another Greek Jew, a resident of Jerusalem, translated it presumably from the Hebrew to the Greek. And so I don't care whether this is true or not, meaning I would take this as authentic and I would take it as true, but even if it's not, that's not the point. Somebody wrote these words because they wanted to authorize the text by virtue of its derivation from Jerusalem, meaning it's the very Judeanness, the very Jerusalemness of this text that authorizes it and that makes it relevant to diasporan Jews living in Egypt, who are then meant to read it and say, oh, I guess we better celebrate Purim, not because it's relevant to us as a diasporan story and we're diasporan Jews, but the very opposite, because our brethren in Jerusalem, our leaders who are conservators of the authentic tradition, told us to keep Purim. So it actually totally undermines what the original Hebrew version of Esther is doing, which is situating the existential future of the Jewish people in the diaspora. Comes the Colophon and says, well, actually, here's why this is an authoritative letter. It's because it comes from Jerusalem. And so my question is, and by the way, people miss this little Colophon all the time. There's all kinds of Purim Torah. People like to talk about Greek Esther, but this is really, I think, the most important part of Greek Esther in terms of how we should understand this book. So my question is this part of something bigger? And obviously it is, because I have lots more pages on the source sheet. Is this, what can this little addition tell us about Judean diasporan relations, or at least how Judeans perceived that relationship? And is this part of a larger phenomenon? And so what I want to do is show you a few other texts that I think are very interesting and suggest that Judeans have a very proactive interest in the piety of diasporan Jewry, not only the piety, but the loyalty of diasporan Jewry to Jews in Jerusalem. And if you're thinking of contemporary parallels, I'm thinking of them too, but we're not going to get into that. Okay, so I want to introduce a work that could have been regarded as scriptural, by which I mean authoritative, in the Second Temple period. I say that because the rabbis cite this text as an authoritative work. Ben Sira has 4 other names: Ecclesiasticus, Sirach, the Wisdom of Ben Sira. It goes by many names. We're going to call it Ben Sira. So this text is a wisdom text. I don't even include the actual text. I only include the opening introduction to the Greek version of this text. But the Hebrew version of this text was produced in the early 2nd century BCE by a Judean priest, and this is all documented. So we'll get to some of why I take this as authentic soon. So in the early 2nd century BCE, a Hebrew-speaking priest in Jerusalem, or at least in Judea, produces a wisdom text for his students who are in Judea, also Hebrew or Aramaic speakers. And the wisdom text regards all kinds of texts very similar to Proverbs and other wisdom texts in the Tanakh regarding how to piously live one's life. It does show some Hellenistic influence. That's not a problem for me because there is no cultural boundary, there's no borderline between Judea and the diaspora when it comes to the Hellenistic influences. They're all in the Hellenistic world. It's definitely written in Hebrew. And I'll just say that if you've read, there are many interesting books on this. I do have a chapter on this in my book, but Sisters of Sinai, there's some really amazing books that have come out recently on the discovery of an ancient Hebrew fragment of Ben Sira, which not only proves that it was written originally in Hebrew, but also was the beginning of the recovery of all the 250,000 texts in the Cairo Geniza. So the discovery in modern times of a Hebrew fragment of Ben Sira was very important for proving that it was written in Hebrew, but also led to the recovery. I don't say discovery, because Jews in Egypt knew about it, recovery in the public realm of the Cairo Geniza. So Ben Sira is very important. Okay, so Sira, and Ben Sira is maybe his grandson. So Sira writes wisdom text in Hebrew in the early 2nd century BCE. Now, we have this text in Greek. We have fragments of it in Hebrew from the Cairo Geniza. We have fragments of citations of the text in rabbinic literature. But until very modern times, we really didn't have a Hebrew text of Ben Sira. We knew that the rabbi cited it in Greek. We knew that the rabbi cited it in Hebrew. There were theories that it had originally been written in Hebrew, but not proven until the Cairo Geniza was opened up. But we knew that it was circulating widely in Greek because it's preserved in the Catholic canon. It's preserved in the Apocrypha. So it is absolutely, it was a popular book. It was an important book, not only for early Christians, but also for Jews. Okay. Just like the Greek version of Esther has all these additions that do not appear in the Hebrew version of Esther, the Greek version of Ben Sira has a prologue that does not appear in the original Hebrew Ben Sira that survives from the Cairo Geniza. So I'll say that again. The prologue in Greek does not appear in the original Hebrew because the prologue is written by the translator, and the translator is Sira's grandson. The translator is a bilingual Judean Jew who's very worried about the spiritual affairs of diaspora and Jewry. And this is how he justifies the translation that he produces into Greek. Many great teachings have been given to us through the law and the prophets. Here, law would be nomos, which actually is Torah. So law is not a great translation. The Torah and the Nevi'im. The Ketuvim, by the way, I would say in the 2nd century BCE, that what we call the Ketuvim in the Tanakh, and this, I think had some fluidity still in the late Second Temple period. So, Jesus talks about the law and the prophets as closed and canonical. And here we have early evidence that the Torah and the Nevi'im, those were closed. Nevi'im, the Ketuvim, maybe not. But anyway, many great teachings have been given to us through the law and the prophets and the others that follow them. I think that would be Ketuvim, whatever that would have meant. And for these, we should praise Israel for instruction and wisdom. Now, and wisdom here being like a buzzword, not only do Hellenists and Stoic philosophers have wisdom, but we Jews have our own tradition of wisdom. Now, those who read the scriptures must not only themselves understand them, but must also, as lovers of learning, be able through the spoken and written word to help the outsiders. That is a very strange term, and I'm going to bold that. So my grandfather, don't be distracted by Jesus, just I think his name would have been Yeshua. And I'm not sure exactly Yeshua. Okay, fine. Whatever. So my grandfather, who had devoted himself especially to the reading of the law and the prophets and the other books of our ancestors. It's like Torah, Nevi'im, and whatever Ketuvim are circulating. They're still a little new, early Second Temple period. My grandfather devoted himself to reading these holy texts and had acquired considerable proficiency in them. So he was led to write something pertaining to instruction and wisdom, right? He writes this wisdom book for Hebrew or Aramaic speaking Jews in the land of Israel, so that by becoming familiar also with his book, those who love learning might make even greater progress in living according to the law. Whatever, this is very highfalutin sort of Hellenistic way of saying, my grandfather was a great scholar. He wanted to help others achieve a higher level of piety. And so he wrote his wisdom text. Now, look at how he characterizes the intended audience for his grandfather's book. Those who are the intended audience for this book are lovers of learning. Now look at how he speaks about diasporan Jewry. You, and here the you is Greek-speaking diasporan Jews living in Egypt, you are invited to read it with goodwill and attention and be indulgent in cases where, and here he has some interesting apologies for translation, despite our diligent labor in translating, we may seem to have rendered phrases imperfectly, for what was originally expressed in Hebrew does not have exactly the same sense when translated. And here I think he's not just being falsely modest. I think he's actually saying that Hebrew is inherently superior, and he's making a little bit of a dig at Greek-speaking Jews. But it'll have to do because you don't speak Hebrew. So Hebrew's ideal and Hebrew's the best. But if you speak Hebrew, this is better than nothing. Not only this book, but even the Torah itself, the prophecies, and the rest of the books. Again, I feel like so bad for Ketuvim because it doesn't even have a name yet. Differ not a little when read in the original. So the original is best, but if you got to read it in Greek, then whatever, man, I guess that's better than nothing. Now he gives some historical detail. When I came to Egypt in the 38th year, so this would be sometime in the second half of maybe the 140s or 130s BCE, and I stayed in Egypt for some time. I found opportunity for no little instruction. It seemed highly necessary that I should devote myself devote some diligence to the translation of this book. And now look at this last line of the prologue. I applied my skill day and night to complete and publish the book for those living abroad who wish to gain learning and are disposed to living according to the law. So if you do a close comparison over here, the intended audience of his grandfather's work are Hebrew or Aramaic speaking Jews in the land of Israel who are lovers of learning and learning to master the law and the prophets. Whereas the diasporan Jews speaking Greek in Egypt, they wish to gain learning and are disposed to live according to the Torah, but don't currently necessarily live according to the law. And so you see the distinction is subtle, but very clear and undeniable that he's making a clear separation between those Jews living in the land of Israel who are lovers of learning and who can, in their own language, master the scriptures, and those who only are disposed to doing so, who wish to doing so. And so I think, again, there is a pattern emerging here. And the pattern is that in the 2nd century BCE, there are Jews in Judea who are worried about the spiritual welfare of Greek-speaking Jews in the diaspora. And what's interesting is I'll just say parenthetically, we have no documents that survive, except for maybe one example from the 5th century BCE, and I could talk about that in the Q&A. But we have no documents that survive from the late Second Temple period, from the Hellenistic period and on, from the diaspora to Judea, that affirms this uneven relationship. Meaning we don't have text from the diaspora saying to the Judeans, you are our religious authorities, please translate your holy books for us and tell us how to live because we can't run our own communities. But we do have Judeans writing these letters to the diaspora. And I want to spend the next 15 minutes or so showing you 2 other examples of such documents. And these are personal letters that are written by Jews in Jerusalem to the Jews of Egypt. And we have these documents because sometime in the middle of the 1st century BCE, a scribe who is copying the book of 2 Maccabees, which is one of the works that retells the story of the Hasmonean rebellion against the Syrian Greeks in 175 to 164 BCE, a scribe was copying over what's now called 2 Maccabees and had in hand these letters and thought that they were very important and connected to the theme of the work 2 Maccabees, and opened up the scroll that he was using with these letters, and then he writes 2 Maccabees. So 2 Maccabees as a history of the Hasmoneans actually starts 2 verse 19. Everything before that is these 2 letters that have really nothing to do with the story of the Hasmoneans. There are 2 letters here. One is viewed by all scholars as authentic, and I'll explain what I mean by that soon. And this one is considered a forgery. But by forgery, I don't mean that it was written in 1975. I mean, it was probably written in the late 2nd century BCE. So still very important for our topic. So let's talk about this first letter. it is incredibly rare to have an ancient document that is dated. And this document is dated. It's dated at the very end, and I'm going to get to that. But I want to open up with this introduction. To our brothers, the Jews of Egypt, greetings. Your brothers, the Jews in Jerusalem and in the land of Judah. A good peace. Okay. So you should know that some scholars say that this was originally written in Aramaic because Greek letters would open up with the letter writer's name and then name the addressee, whereas more generally in Aramaic and Hebrew letters, you'd open up with the addressee and then identify yourself. So that's maybe a clue that this was originally written in Aramaic. We don't know. We don't know. May God make for you, and may he be good for you. I think I might be missing a word there. I have to look it up, or someone can look it up. May make for you, may be good to you. I think I'm missing a word there. May he remember his covenant with his faithful servants, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. May he give you all a heart to revere him and to do his will wholeheartedly. And so here I think you could, my Catholic colleagues say, you could read a text with a hermeneutic of suspicion, or you could read a text with a hermeneutic of grace. And so here you could read this with a hermeneutic of grace, like, oh, isn't that nice? They said to their diasporan cousins, may he give you all a heart to revere him. I read this with the hermeneutic of suspicion. I think this is a little dig, like sort of the way that a parent might say to a child, like, I hope you make good choices today. You know, when you say goodbye to them, and they're about to like walk into, school, and they're like, oh, may God give you all the heart to revere him. I don't know. It's my personal hermeneutic of suspicion, and feel free to read it otherwise. May he open your heart again to his Torah and his commandments would imply to me that maybe there is, at least in the imagination of the Judean writers, some closed hearts in diaspora and Jewish communities. But again, we really don't know. May he listen to your prayers and forgive you and not abandon you in an evil time. And here we don't know what the particulars of this reference are. And we continually offer prayers for you. And by the way, I'm going to skip this paragraph and just go to the bottom. We ask you to celebrate Sukkot in the month of Kislev. And I love this line because this is one of the earliest attestations, and maybe it is the earliest attestations of the connection between Hanukkah and Sukkot, that originally Hanukkah was conceived of as a celebration of Sukkot because the most recent holiday that year in 164 BC had not been celebrated in the temple. And so once the temple is recovered in December, they celebrate Sukkot. So it's a really interesting connection. But what I'm interested in is in the year 188, which is obviously not 188 BCE because there is no BCE. What it is they're counting down from the beginning of the Seleucid period in 311 BCE. And so that takes us to around 124 to 123 BCE. So the end of the 2nd century BC. Okay, so do you see things popping up on my screen like it's asking me to save every 10 minutes? Hold on a second. Okay, so now I skip to the end, so you know this letter is dated to 124, 123 BCE. But what's interesting is that in the middle of this letter, we have a citation of an earlier letter. In the reign of Demetrius, in the year 169, so that would be 143 BCE, we Jews wrote to you, and we asked you for help. Now, again, there's a lot of dispute about what the particulars are, what these writers are alluding to. In the affliction and in the distress which came upon us in those years with Jason. We know who Jason is. He was he claimed a position of high priesthood, but he was a Hellenizer. And he set fire to the temple gateway, and he shed innocent blood. We prayed to the Lord. He hearkened to us. We brought sacrifices, et cetera, et cetera. And now we told you of our distress back a few years ago when we were fighting the Hellenizers in Judea. And now we're asking you to celebrate in your time of distress, right? We're hoping that God doesn't abandon you in your evil time. Maybe if you do the right thing and you observe God's commandments in the right way, then maybe God will help you too in your time of distress. So there's a lot of I want to call it backhanded compliments or passive aggressive criticism. I would just say that there is an appeal to a past relationship, to a kinship that is very significant, that is very real for the writers. And yet there's also a sense of authority and conservatorship over the Jews of diaspora. And so when they're writing this letter, really what they're trying to get to is keep Hanukkah at this very, very early stage in the 140s BCE. This is a new holiday. It's not a biblical holiday. It's obviously not in the Tanakh. You have to make a case for it. You have to make a case to diasporan Jews who were not living through the war, who did not witness the violation of the Syrian Greeks, who don't live under the Syrian Greeks. They live under the Ptolemaic Greeks. They might not feel that this holiday is for them. They might feel this is particular to the experience of the Judeans. And the writers say, no, we are all part of the same people, and we come from a common past. We have a common kinship. And if we establish this holiday, we expect you to celebrate it, even though you weren't there yourselves. So I want to take you to one last document, and then I'll stop sharing. We'll have some conversation. And this document is very difficult, but it's really intriguing. So again, this is preserved in 2 Maccabees, chapter 1, verse 10, all the way through 2:18. It's a very, very long document. And again, I'm happy to email this to you after the talk. You could look it up online because this is part of the Apocrypha, and so it's in the Catholic Bible. Easy to find, but often ignored, especially when we talk about the history of Hanukkah and the history of Judean diasporan relations. I'm just scrolling up and down so you can see it. This is long, this is complicated. This is also especially complicated, the second letter, because it's not dated to the same year as the first letter. And in fact, scholars view this letter as a forgery. And now I'm going to explain to you what that means and why they think that. The people in Jerusalem and in Judea and the council of elders and Judas, all these are the writers, to Aristobulus, tutor of King Ptolemy and member of the stock of the anointed priest. So Aristobulus is a Jew from a priestly line who lives in Egypt, probably in Alexandria. And to the other Jews in Egypt, greetings and wishes for health. Having been saved by God from great perils, we thank him greatly as befits men who war against a king, for God himself cast away those who made war on the holy city. And so if scholars are correct to think that this Judas is none other than Judah Maccabee, this would have been written in 164 BCE. However, the second paragraph details the execution of Antiochus for Epiphanes in a way that's historically problematic and inconsistent with other historical sources we have about his death. And therefore, scholars believe that this is not something that Judah could have written in 164 BCE, and that probably it was written towards the end of the 2nd century BCE. It was certainly written before books of Maccabees begin to be circulated with these 2 letters attached to them. So the letter is late 2nd Temple BCE, but even if it's attributed to Judah Maccabee and the Council of Elders, most scholars do not believe that this is an authentic letter written by Judah Maccabee himself in 164. So that's important to know, because really what we want to focus on here is what is the message of this letter, and also like what would be the advantage for the writer or the writers to make this association, to make this authorial claim that this was written by none other than the great Maccabee, the great warrior himself. So what you have in the document is a series of stories that begins in recent past and then moves farther back and back and back and back all the way into the early biblical period. And that's why it's confusing, because you have a story that just happened 30 years ago, and then a story from the period of Jeremiah and the post-exilic period, and then a story from the 8th century, and on and on and on. And so we're working backwards, and it's difficult structurally. I'm going to skip the part about Antiochus's death. And this is really the introduction to the letter. We want to convince you to observe the holiday of Hanukkah. And the reason also I think this is interesting for this week is because you see that both Hanukkah and Purim are used by Judean writers and deployed to diasporan communities as a way of authorizing their own, leadership. Look, you got to keep Purim. You got to keep Hanukkah. Why? Because we told you to. Not because some diasporan Jew wrote about it 3 centuries ago, but we're telling you to, and we're telling you that we all have a common stake in this common story of the Jewish people. Okay, so we're about to celebrate the purification of the temple. That will be Hanukkah, but Hanukkah is not a term used yet until the period of the rabbis. So we thought that we ought to let you know that you too might celebrate it. And here's why. I'm going to start with a story about Nehemiah. So actually, the the roots of Hanukkah precede the war of 175 to 164 BC and goes all the way back to whenever Nehemiah lived. Maybe that's end of the 6th century or 5th century, depending on how, I guess, how literally you're going to read the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, but whatever the case is, early Second Temple period. Okay, so the writers say, we want to tell you a story about Nehemiah, and this story is going to tell you that Hanukkah has direct relevance to all diasporan Jews. And that because of the story, you have to celebrate Hanukkah, that its origins precede the war against the war against the Saints. Okay, I will ask that everybody mute. So thank you in advance. Okay, when our forefathers were being carried off to Persia, the pious priests of that time hid some fire. They hid fire from the altar of the temple. Okay, so this is actually the beginning of the Babylonian exile in anywhere between 597 and 586 BCE. The exile is a 12-year process. So when the priests are being exiled, they take some fire from the altar and they hide it. They hide it in a pit and they shut it up securely so that the place remained secret, unknown to all. Now, Jews who went down to exile, this letter says, knew about this hidden fire from the temple altar. And when it came time, 538 or 537 BC, or whenever Nehemiah lived, but when it came time for the Judeans to pick up their belongings and go back to Judea after the exile ended, Nehemiah knew about this hidden fire. And he says to his priests, his priestly colleagues, you got to go find the fire, because if we're going to rebuild the temple, we need that fire from the first temple. This is so strange. We don't have any kind of corollary with other texts outside of this letter. So it's fascinating, I think. So they don't find a fire. They find a viscous liquid. They find some kind of liquidy tar. That's how I imagine it. Nehemiah says, bring whatever you find from this cave. And so they do, and they make an altar. And they put the liquid over the altar and they wait a while. And after a few hours, the sun rises, the sun begins to shine through the clouds. And I think that's a typo, a great shire blazed up. I think that's fire. I'm sorry, I typed this in when I actually could have copied and pasted. A great fire blazed up to the astonishment of all. And so there's a miraculous fire that is ignited when Nehemiah brings this sacrifice. It's not really sacrifice, but puts this liquid on the altar. And the sign that Nehemiah interprets from this incident is that God is pleased. God is happy with what Nehemiah and his colleagues are doing. And so when they see this miraculous igniting of the viscous liquid that derived from the fire of the first temple, everybody gets super happy and excited. And in fact, the priest Jonathan leads the people in prayer. And now look at the content of the prayer, because the prayer seems to have nothing to do with what actually just happened. But the prayer is very, very important for the diasporan audience reading this text. God, creator of all, awesome and powerful. I'm skipping a little bit. Our sole good king, our sole provider, the preserver of Israel from every exile, the one who chose and sanctified the patriarchs. Accept our sacrifice for the sake of all your people. Guard your portion, make it holy. Gather together our dispersion. Now, this actually doesn't make any sense, right? Because they've just been gathered. Nehemiah, yes, there are some people who haven't returned yet, but Nehemiah is speaking in Judea. They've come back. So when you're a diasporan reader in Egypt reading this letter at the end of the 2nd century BCE, and you hear that long ago there was a miracle of fire associated with the temple in the time of Nehemiah, and Nehemiah celebrated that miracle by asking God to gather the dispersion back to Judea, you might feel a little bit bad. Because the implication is obvious. The implication is you had an opportunity to return. In fact, you've had that opportunity for 3 centuries and you're still in the dispersion when Nehemiah prayed for you to come back and you can come back and you're not coming back. God did miracles for you. God ignited fire on an altar for you out of viscous liquid and you're still hanging out in Egypt. So Yonatan prays, free those who are enslaved among the nations. Of course, they're not really enslaved anymore, right? Even in the Eastern diaspora in Persia, the Jews are not enslaved, and on and on and on. Gather us together. And then another miraculous thing happens, the flame blazes up to the heavens and is consumed. The news of the phenomenon spreads. Everyone's so impressed. Even the king of the Persians is like, wow, this is incredible, and gives Nehemiah a lot of money because, is this a historical detail? Maybe not, but it sounds really great. The king took large sums of money and distributed it to Nehemiah. And that's amazing. But that's not the only story that the writers have to tell the diasporan audience. They go back in time now from the post-exilic period, let's say that's the late 6th century BC, back to the time of Yirmiyahu, the late 7th century BC. That's not the only story we have to tell you. I want to tell you something about Yirmiyahu, the authors say. It was Yirmiyahu who told those priests at the beginning of exile to hide that fire. So Yirmiyahu said, take that fire, and we have documents proving it. Documentation is very important to all these texts that we've looked at tonight. And the prophet gave the Torah to those who were being led into exile and admonished them to not forget the Lord's commandments, right? And of course, again, I see another implication here about the responsibility of the Jews in diaspora to stay pious and also to listen to their Judean kin. And we have this text that says that Jeremiah went out to the mountain where Moses ascended. This would be Chorev, right, Har Sinai. And there he found a cave. And in the cave, he hid all the stuff from the temple because they were going down to Babylonia. And Jeremiah wanted to protect all these holy things from the first temple. And so he puts all the things in the cave. And then people try to find the cave. And he says, no. This place will remain unknown until God gathers his people together. And of course, in the time that this letter is written at the end of the 2nd century BC, that time has not yet come because the writers of this letter don't know where this place is. The readers of the letter don't know where this place is. And the implication again is the ingathering has not yet happened. But oh, how our prophets prayed for that ingathering, and your very existence in the diaspora prevents that ingathering from occurring. And this is why you should keep Hanukkah. God does miracles when we return to his land. God does miracles with light and fire when we show that we trust in his covenantal promises. And not only is Jeremiah involved in the story of Hanukkah, but Shlomo is involved in the story of Hanukkah. And here we have a corrupt preservation, which means that there are lines missing from the text, and we don't exactly know what Shlomo prays to God, but it goes all the way back to Moses. So we have Nehemiah, and then back to Yirmiyahu, and then back to Shlomo, and then back to Moses. And there's an obvious polemic here in this letter, which is we have a continued tradition of being protected in our land when we make sacrifices to be there, and you have not made that sacrifice. If you want to look at any of these texts, the writers say we have them. We have a whole library of these documents. Just ask us and we'll send you copies. And the closing of the letter, please celebrate the days. God who saved his entire people, meaning you're involved in all these stories, even if you think you're liminal, you're marginal, you're actually involved in all of them. And we hope in God that he'll speedily have mercy upon us and gather us from the lands under the heavens to his holy place. And so again, there's a final wish, or maybe you could call it, if you have a hermeneutic of suspicion, a final twist in the knife that we're just hoping God will bring us back. Hint, hint. What we mean is we hope that you finally come back to where you belong. And so my suggestion is that Greek Esther participates in a genre of texts, Judean texts, written in Judea, for the sole purpose of communicating with the Jews in Greek-speaking lands, specifically in Egypt, and telling them that they should not have dual loyalty. They need to remember where they come from. They participate in a common story, and that story has to guide them when they make choices. So now I see that there have been comments in the chat. I haven't read any of these comments, but we're not a big group. And so I think that, okay, yes, there's mention of Jerusalem with the exile. Okay, I think what we're going to do is just feel free to call out a question because I can't read all of this, but you do have my email. If a question is not addressed, you can email me the question or the insight. I don't think that these were fundraising letters because we don't have any evidence that they're fundraising letters. There's nothing in the letters that ask for money. In fact, I think that these are really pure-hearted, like real sincere letters. Keep these holidays because we have to have commonality in practice. Otherwise we'll fracture. So I don't see evidence for that. But yes, definitely Jewish guilt trip. But no, feel free to unmute yourselves because, you know, we're just 20 people. And so if you have a comment, please feel free. Oh, Ellen, thank you for fixing, using the Jewish annotated Apocrypha, which I actually have right here. You looked it up. This is really an amazing book, by the way. Yeah, any
It's
questions?
like Ezra or Jesse wants to say something.
Okay.
Oh,
Go ahead, Jesse.
Jesse. Yeah, thanks. So I was curious about this relationship between the diaspora and that there are no letters that were coming back. Wasn't the fact that they were giving money to the Beit HaMikdash enough of an expression of fealty, right? Like, do they need to send a letter back saying, "Oh, we acknowledge that you're the boss"? Like, they're giving money, so isn't that enough? I was just curious about that.
So that's very well documented. Like, we know that Jews were sending tons of money, especially from Egypt, to support the administration of the temple. Philo talks about it, Josephus talks about it, Romans talk about it, Cicero is like super annoyed by it. So it's very well documented and it's undeniable. So what do you do with that? So I do think, you know, just like there are Jews in America today who write their checks to JNF or whatever to plant in the Galil, you know, that I wouldn't call it like assuaging their guilt, but I also wouldn't make the jump from writing those checks to saying, we accept your authority over us. I don't make that jump. I think we would have to be careful because we just don't have the evidence that Jews are saying, so tell us how to live, right? No, it doesn't mean that they don't feel a connection to Judea. I'm absolutely convinced that you're right. They do feel a connection to Judea. And, you know, that's like just so well documented, nobody can deny that. The question is, are they looking to Judea for leadership in a way that affirms Judean exceptionalism? And I don't see any evidence for diasporan affirmation of Judean exceptionalism. Don't see it. So that's like an interesting question. So then what did they think? Well, we do know from Philo and from other Alexandrian Jewish texts that they were self-organized in the diaspora. So that Jewish communities in the diaspora had gerousia, for instance, which is basically the Greek word for Sanhedrin. So they were self-organized. They had local civil judicial bodies when the host government allowed them to sort of run their own affairs. We have genarchs and ethnarchs, which were basically, you might call that the nasi in Hebrew. So you had local Jewish leaders who were running local affairs. And how did these individuals govern their local Jewish communities if they always had to, you know, write notes and dispatches to Judea saying, can I do this? Can I do this? Can I do this? No, they weren't. But they were committed, not only financially, but I think spiritually. I think that they were very connected to Judea. And I would not use these texts to undermine that. And I think you're absolutely right to note it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So this was great. Thank you very much. Two questions. One is, I guess I'll up in the last one.
Who is talking?
Oh, Ezra Zuckerman-Skivon over here. Can you not see me?
Good to see you. Okay, hello.
That's funny. Two questions. One actually just follows up on the last one, which is just the term, so Judean versus Jew. And so my understanding is that it's not until relatively late, right? So I'm curious what are we assuming about how the diaspora Jews in, you know, scare quotes, thought of, so just if it just meant Judean, that just in the nomenclature would have essentially associated them with, you know, sort of a homeland, right?
It's a massively large and live academic debate. When do we have the transition from Judean to Jew? The Greek is Judaios, which originally in the early Greek literature means someone who has ethnogeographic ties to Judea. I think this transition happens at the end of the 2nd century BC. I know that Daniel Boyarin and Steve Mason and some others put it very, very late. And there are a few, I think, polemical motivations that they have for that. I think that they do not want to translate the New Testament, especially the Gospel of John, as condemning all Jews, right? But if you say that the Gospel of John, especially in chapter 8, calls Judeans the children of the devil, it sounds a lot nicer than saying Jews are the children of the devil. There are all kinds of factors at play here. Is the word Judaism used in the Second Temple period? Almost not at all. And so that, I think, is a separate question. When do we have this category of Judaism? I think that you have that in the later Roman period because there are no isms of religion. Everything's very, very fluid at this stage in the 2nd century BC. But when it comes to how to translate Judaios, I think that when diasporan Jews are using that term, they're not just speaking about an ethnogeographic designation. I think that by the end of the 2nd century, there's something that is actually very distinctive and confusing to outsiders, which is that Jews had become a people. And what does that mean?
Well,
Good.
Yeah, hold on one second, Susanna. Ezra, you said you had another question?
Just one other question. I was curious how you relate this to Aaron Kohler's thesis about Esther,
Yeah.
which, as I recall, basically sees it itself as a polemic against Daniel, right? Which is sort of like also putting Jerusalem and Judea and God really at the center, and then kind of subversively using Hebrew to kind of build up an idea about being a diaspora Jew, right?
Yeah, but I don't think that undermines my position.
No, I actually think it.
Yeah, I have his book right behind me. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it actually fits. I'm just curious how you think it would fit.
I think Aaron is great, and I recommend his book on Esther to everybody. And also, what he notes at the very end of his book is that maybe not all 6 editions were produced in Judea, which I'm fine with. I don't think that like undermines my argument. Based on just the style of Greek, it's possible that the edicts in the 2nd and second to last editions were added later in the diaspora. Aaron does suggest that, but that's fine. I mean, I think that the Colophon is really what we need to focus on. I think that whoever wrote the Colophon is wanting this Greek text to be read as Judean. That's what's interesting to me. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And Susanna.
Sure.
so I have 2 questions. Number one, if I remember correctly, and I just as a side comment, I find it kind of ironic that we're doing this all in English, and we're talking about those, Jews that had to do all their business and reading everything in Greek, but be that as it may. If I remember correctly, in the Megillah, there's the word mityahadim.
Yeah.
So whether you take it to mean that they became Jews or they pretended to become Jews, it would seem to say that word there is Jews and not Judeans.
I agree with you.
They're up in Susa or wherever.
I agree. Many scholars will disagree, and they'll say what that means is that you have this diasporan population that should have assimilated, because in the ancient world, your ethnogeographic location determines your manner of observance, right? So like if you leave your place and you have to take on the gods and the loyalty to like the pantheon in which you currently live. So I think that some scholars will say mityahadim means that they're committed to a Judean way of life. Rather than syncretistically incorporating the pantheon in which they live. But I don't read it that way. I think that it's very possible that at this early stage, it means something more than that. And again, there's interesting scholarship on this. John Levinson writes very compellingly on this. So again, these are open questions.
My other question had to do with, just put in context for me, how this stuff that you were talking about in this period, how that either precedes or whatever the people of the Mishnah. Just like, give me that timeline.
Yeah, so the Tannaitic period technically ends with the fall of the temple in 70 CE. And so that would be what we would call the early rabbinic period, from 70 to 200. And then the Amoraic period would be 200 to around the 5th or 6th century. And so this is, I don't like to say proto-rabbinic, I don't like to say pre-rabbinic, but it is before the rabbinic period. I don't like to say that because I think it serves to erase the important and very individual, uniquely distinctive identity of Jews at this earlier stage. But some might say proto-rabbinic.
But I mean, just again, as a when are the people like Hillel and Shammai?
That's 1st century, right?
Okay, so that's a little bit later, in other words.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Any other?
Malka?
Yeah, please.
What does it mean when someone says he's a Levite and priest?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just a way of authorizing, right? Not only a Judean or someone from Jerusalem, but someone who has this like genealogical authority. And I think that it also, if you look at the addressee in the second letter, Aristobulus, who's identified as a priest, I think it could be read as like a little bit of a jab. Like, you have a priestly duty to be in Jerusalem, and you're not, capitalizing on this privilege that you have. I think it serves to authorize the letter writers. I don't know that it does much more than that.
Malka, hi, it's Jerry. Don't the scholars of the Mishnah and Gemara try to discourage people from learning Sefer Chitzonim as a rule?
No, I don't see any. I don't know of any explicit text in the rabbinic corpus that says no, you can't read it. Now, there's a suspicion of written texts, and there's a sort of a denigrating attitude towards Greek Jewish texts. But I'm not reading these texts as scriptural. I'm reading them as very profoundly significant for our understanding of early Jewish history. There is a rabbinic suspicion of, I mean, look, I don't know of any rabbinic text that talks about the Apocrypha, right? Because those are later categories. But when it comes to Greek texts, yeah, there are rabbinic discussions about like what do these texts, how to use them, especially when it comes to the Greek translations of the scriptures. Are they authoritative? What do you do to save them? Can you break Shabbat, for example, that famous discussion? Can you break Shabbat if they're on fire? So there's, there are questions.
So who was the ultimate authority about what got into Tanakh and what was left out? The Sefer HaMaccabim is not in there. Sefer Esther is, but only part of Sefer Esther. If you look at the Apocrypha, which has a whole, continuation, which picks up from the Perek Yud, Pasuk Daled, where ours ends at Perek Yud, Pasuk Gimel. So, I mean, who drew the line for all of these things?
Yeah. I mean, there's this famous passage in Bava Batra, I think in Ted Rav, regarding the various authors, the listing the names of the books of the Tanakh and also their authors. The fact is that it happens very late, right? I mean, that's preserved in the Bavli. You have some Mishnaic arguments about what goes in, what comes out, right? Like is shiurim part of it? Is Kohelet part of it? But that's actually fascinating to me because it really is quite late to still be having a conversation. But like I noted when we discussed the prologue of Ben Sira, this is an individual who's very pious, who's saying the Torah, right? Torah, Nevi'im, and the other stuff. He doesn't even have a name for the Ketuvim in the 2nd century BC. It's just other things that we think are really important. And then, you could actually layer that attitude onto the rabbinic period itself when the rabbis are citing some texts as authoritative, like Enoch, Hanoch, which does not get canonized, and Ben Sira itself cited as authoritative and not preserved in what we call the Masoretic text. And so what I would say to your question is it's very complicated and it's late. The final canonization of the Tanakh, it's late, right? Still discussed, especially with Ketuvim in the rabbinic period. The Torah is set, the prophets are set, Ketuvim maybe not until quite late. And if you're gonna have a text that's originally written in Greek, that primarily circulated in Greek and was written in the 2nd century BC, that text is not going into the Hebrew Bible, right? Like you're not gonna have 1 Maccabees in the Tanakh, even though it was originally written in Hebrew, but it's circulated in Greek and it's very late. So you're not gonna have the story of Susanna, which is one of the Daniel stories that circulated in Greek. These stories are late and they circulated in the wrong language. So that's a very boring answer to a very good question.
Okay, let's as a corollary to that question, why is some books that are Apocrypha canonized into the Catholic Bible, but not into the Protestant?
So the whole Apocrypha is preserved in the Catholic Bible. So the Apocrypha is a collection of texts. And this is not an easy, I really can't tell you, look, in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, and 5th centuries, there are canon lists that are circulating among early Christian sects. And there's actually some great scholarship on this. I am not a scholar of canon lists, but the Christians until the Council of Nicaea in the 4th century don't know what their canon is. They're still debating, right? You have the Old Testament, which by the way is not the same thing as the Tanakh. And then you have what we call the New Testament, but then there are all these other texts. In fact, there are other gospels that don't get preserved in the New Testament. And so the question of the Christian canon, actually, it never gets settled because there are various Christian communities. There's Greek Orthodox, there's the Ethiopian Church, the Russian Orthodox Church. They don't all have the same list of holy texts. So, we can make an easy line between Catholic and Protestant. The Catholics have the Apocrypha, the Protestant don't. It's actually much more complicated than that because they didn't reach a single consensus. this is really complicated stuff, and I wish, I could
Yeah.
say more, but I definitely can tell you, if you want to email me, I could tell you what articles to read. It's very interesting.
Any last quick question or comment?
Well, it was really fun. It was fun to be with all of you and to see some familiar faces and some new ones. And please God, we'll have a recovery to all those who are suffering physically, emotionally, and maybe one day we'll be able to meet each other in person soon.
Thank you very much, Malka. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.